In the Qur'an, Allah describes the Qur'an as being shifa, cure, is healing, something that's going to help us get from a bad state to a good state. Sometimes the bad state that we're in is a result of like external factors, things that are like not necessarily what you would say is like our fault, okay? But sometimes we are our own worst enemies. And a lot of the difficulties that we struggle with, in a lot of ways, are the result of our own behavior, our actions and inactions in some cases. And sometimes those inactions and actions in some cases, they come from a misunderstanding of life. Yeah. So we have this belief or this concept, and we are so gung-ho about it, right? I deserve this. And as a result of believing that for the entirety of our life, we mistreat people. And then we come to realize, you know what, the reason I mistreated them was because I thought that I deserved something, but in reality, I was being unfair to people. So the Qur'an is very powerful because it switches from being sympathetic to holding people accountable. Yeah. And in the passage that we're going to go at today, inshallah, talk about today, the passage actually talks about a misunderstanding of a basic principle, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that gave us this life, and this life is temporary. And as a result of this temporary life, the test of it is how do we behave. And then Allah gives a prescription, right, the shifa component. How to behave if you want to live with the least regret. Shaykh, can you walk us through some of the passage and give us sort of the beginning part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the very first thing, this is almost kind of like if I went to the doctor and he gave me like a whole like checklist. Yeah. Right? You got to cut this out of your diet. Yes. You got to do this. You got to take this medication, apply heat, apply ice, whatever. Sure. So the very first thing is, it says, وَالَّذِينَ يَجْتَنِبُونَ كَبَائِرَ الْإِثْمِ وَالْفَوَاحِشَ إِلَّا اللَّمَمْ. So the very first thing it says is that you got to cut out the major sins and like the really, really heinous, ugly stuff, like the obvious stuff. Except, and interestingly, the Quran says, إِلَّا اللَّمَمْ, except for little minor indiscretions, little slip-ups, because everyone has slip-ups. Like, so for instance, probably not saying this accurately, but I'm just thinking of the best analogy that I can give, is that if I have to be mindful of my sugar intake, you know, then like the idea that there's actually some sugar in rice, or there's some sugar in an apple, is not really the problem the doctor has with me. His concern is not that I'm going to eat an apple. His concern is that I'm going to eat the ice cream sandwich.
There we go, sandwich. A lot of people don't realize, best sandwich, people go chicken, sandwich. They go this, they forget ice cream.
Ice cream sandwich.
Yeah. Ice cream inside a donut. That's inside now you're normal.
You know what I love? You just got to think outside the box.
Yeah, absolutely.
But specifically ice cream sandwich box. but what I will say, and this is interesting, subhanAllah, Shaykh, is that the Qur'an never gives unrealistic expectations.
Never.
And I think that's one way in which people kind of give up. If the doctor told you, like, you can't have any sugar at all, like even if someone offers you a slice of an apple, you have to run away. The person naturally, unless they're it's not sustainable, unless they're in a very specific circumstance where that's their case. But generally speaking, people need some type of outlet. So they even talk, you know, when you talk about nutrition and all that, they say, make sure that you give yourself some room to breathe. You know, it's not about cutting everything out. It's about being able to manage your intake of everything. So this is a good analogy. Yeah. Because a lot of times people set up unrealistic expectations, but Allah Ta'ala never does that.
Yeah. And I think from the perspective of like, sometimes you don't know where to start, like you said, and you're like, there's so many things. If we start giving all the little things, like if I'm telling someone you need to learn all of these things, is like, let me start with the 2 or 3 big things that are going to help you accomplish 80% of what you need to. And then, you're going to have work after that. You have to clean up like the details, but it's like, you don't start at the details. Yes. You have like a huge messy room and you start like tidying up, like, you know, your wires instead of moving the furniture. Like move the furniture out of there. Don't organize your wires right now. Like your room has junk in it. Get the big stuff out. Like, simplifying the message in that sense. And
there's a hadith that communicates that, where the Prophet ﷺ says, whatever I've forbidden you from doing, don't do any of it. But whatever I've commanded you to do whatever you can, whatever's possible. I think the understanding is that when you are stopping something, you should be able to stop something. And that's why Allah Ta'ala starts by telling us what? You have to stop doing these things. You don't realize it, but you're actually impeding your own progress. If you continue to fall into these big sins, you're going to have these lofty goals, but you're going to wonder, why am I doing this? If a person is going out every night, doing bad things every night, and then they want to wake up for Fajr, you're going to find that to be a struggle.
Yeah.
But if you cut out the bad behavior the night before, waking up for Fajr might actually happen, inshallah.
I remember, we've talked about this before. I was talking with my Shaykh one time and kind of saying like, when you're in that young student kind of mode and it's like, this is very difficult, very challenging. What's the secret? I need like, how are we going to do this? How is this even possible? And I remember him just sitting and he had a very casual kind of demeanor about him. And he was like, it's really simple. And I was like, what are you talking about? It's simple. And he's like, yeah, it's simple. He goes, do your obligations, pray 5 times a day, fast in Ramadan, give your zakat if you can afford to, and don't commit major sins. And I was like, that's easier said than done. And he goes, is it? He goes, don't murder somebody. That shouldn't be too hard. Don't steal. Don't commit fornication or adultery. Like in that way, like his presentation of it was, there are these 5 major things you have to do and 5 major things you don't do. That's it. That's your checklist.
So keep it simple.
Keep it simple.
And then the next ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then talks about the positive impact or the positive change. So it's interesting, right? Because you almost have to remove the negative. And for a lot of people as well, the solution to some of your problems is not necessarily reordering your entire life. To Ustadh Obaidullah's point, sometimes it's about just removing, right? In English, we have the phrase addition by subtraction.
Yeah.
You can actually accomplish a lot by stopping something. So Ustadh Obaidullah, Allah Ta'ala mentions in the next, those who respond to their Lord, establish prayer, conduct their affairs with mutual consultation, and donate from whatever we have provided for them. What's the principle here? We see Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is naming a lot of things that are very foundational. So what are some thoughts that you have when you read a verse like this?
So one of the things that's very fascinating about this verse is the mention of prayer and the mention of spending, like the principles that everyone's familiar with, prayer, zakat.
Yes.
So those, you see them all over the Qur'an. What's interesting in this verse is kind of that interjection of وَأَمْرُهُمْ shura, giving them that additional mandate through this, which is another thing that is mandated upon you is to do shura, is to consult one another in your matters. All of this, everything that's been commanded to you is a communal thing. Like you're all going to have to do this stuff together.
Very good.
It's not your prayer at home alone or your zakat alone. Everything, there's a communal, like ummah emphasis on everything.
Yeah.
And then again, the commandment almost shows how heavy this task is going to be. It's not going to be like super simple, but we still have to do it.
Yes.
That like it's mandated upon you. And Shura is something like we talk about a lot. Any kind of like leadership discussion, Shura comes up because it's like, you study the life of the Prophet ﷺ, right? He's a prophet. He was given authority and everyone was following. No one was questioning his authority. And yet he still did shura. And of course, because it's a mandate, as we're seeing in the Qur'an, but some of those benefits of shura are so interesting because it's almost easier to not do shura.
Of course,
like
it's always easier.
It's easier to be like, no, I made the decision.
Yeah.
I already got it. I figured it out. And again, you can already hear. And you can already hear in the statement, it's like, I figured it out. I did this. I did the reading. I know best. I know. And it's like, well, that's the whole point. It's like, maybe sometimes you don't know. And maybe you need to talk to other people.
Yeah.
And maybe something will open up for you. You'll still have to make a decision in the end. Like there's still hierarchy in Islam. There's still leaders. There's still amirs. Like someone has to make a decision. Everybody doesn't make a decision. But that idea of consulting, and then we see the beauty of like, almost like the side effects of shura are like, you're actually a leader that people like because you talked to people before you just came and made a decision. You didn't walk into the office one day and say, we're doing this.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, okay, great. Where did that come from? Versus like, oh, I've actually talked to all of you about this and you all expressed concerns and issues and we talked about it and here's the outcome of it. Again, I had to take all that in and make a decision, but there's buy-in. There isn't friction after the decision is made. There is feeling heard. It's such a powerful thing.
Shaykh AbdulNasir mentioned this actually last week at one of our staff meetings here where he said, you know, if you do something 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100, then it gives you the leverage the one time that you do need to be executive, you know, and think about it even in your own family life. You know, if you're somebody that involves people, your family, your friends, in your decision making, then when you do have to make that unilateral decision, which happens sometimes to everybody, you're going to get a lot less pushback, a lot more respect, a lot more buy-in, and a lot more trust. I mean, at the end of the day, and the way that Shaykh framed it last week during our meeting was basically, I've included you 99 times, but this person who doesn't include people can't make that claim. And they can't ask for that support because you haven't done the front end work, which is to be a person that makes shura. وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ, Allah mentioned in the Qur'an. Imam Zarnuji beautifully says about the Prophet ﷺ being given the command to ask for shura. Imam Zarnuji says, and there was no one more intelligent, wise, or decisive than him. But he still was being given this command, in part because it was modeling for us what the best way, people who are not receiving wahi, what life should be like for us.
And it's kind of like the shura is for us.
Yes.
For the companions. By him doing that, it brings them up. It makes it more palatable for them, for anyone who might, again, not that the Prophet ﷺ needs to make something more palatable. But yeah, subhanAllah, I think the point you made as well of like when you have to make the tough decision, when you have to go against perhaps the shura or, what everyone else is advising, you're still making the decision. If you've done that work, you get to make that difficult choice of, well, no, it's going to go this way. You don't fully lose a relationship or trust. You still hold.
Right, like we talk about la yarham, la yurham, right? So it's kind of that idea, like you're saying, if I've extended that grace to everyone around me 99 times, that one time, then they'll extend me grace. If I've given them that courtesy, they'll give me that courtesy.
It's respect, right? At the end of the day, like I respect you enough to actually consult you. I valued you, so I consulted you. But don't take that as I've given up my responsibility. It's still mine. Right?
And one other thing was, there's a narration that says, "Ma nadima man istashara," and that's always intrigued me. The person who does a lot of consultation will not regret. Will not regret what? Will not regret the consultation. Right? And what that means is, even after doing the consultation, we all collectively, all of us, might still get it wrong. All of us did it, we consulted, and we still got it wrong. But the reason why it says you won't regret is because now, as I have to then fix what was wrong, I'm not alone. Because I consulted y'all, now we're going to clean it up together. Otherwise, you're going to be like, go clean up your own mess.
You made your bed, not lying.
And when you go back to do your analysis of like what went wrong, no one's ever going to go and say, oh, it's because I did shura. Like you'll never be like, that was the problem. It was something else. It was probably some other consideration that was missed.
Circumstantial thing.
The other thing about shura that's interesting as well, subhanAllah, is that there's no promise or guarantee. I know you just mentioned this sort of at the end here, that you're always going to be right. But really the goal of shura ultimately is to make sure that there's a collective unit. And Allah Ta'ala in the ayah, وَالَّذِينَ, right, astajabu, right? The idea, the plural is being mentioned constantly. What are some examples of the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ where the shura was made, but it didn't go favorably, or let's say it didn't go for what the Muslims were looking for? I'm thinking, for example, about Uhud, right? Uhud is a very famous example. And even those people that initially kind of pressured the Prophet ﷺ because they missed out on Badr, so they wanted to kind of be a part of the action now. Even when they came back to the Prophet and said, Ya Rasulullah, we're regretting it, he said, no, when a prophet puts on his armor, like, it's time. Which again shows you what the commitment to the shura. Because it wasn't actually his preference to go out. Hudaybiyah, comes to mind. Right? The idea of the Prophet ﷺ, going, and the companions aren't listening at first when the Prophet ﷺ is telling everyone to break their ihram, and then going to his wife radiallahu anha and making shura, and slowly but surely they start to trickle in. What are some examples, Shaykh, from the seerah where you see the Prophet ﷺ engaging in shura with some of the companions, Abu Bakr, Umar, etc.? And there's a very famous statement about Umar, is that Allah Ta'ala revealed statements that agreed with Umar, even at a time when the Prophet ﷺ did not initially project that opinion. So what does it mean then when the Prophet of Allah goes out to somebody and asks for their advice, and how can we start to do this in our own personal lives?
And you quoted one of those scenarios, one of the places where the Prophet ﷺ did shura, and maybe the outcome was based on the shura but wasn't we only know because Allah said so, that that's not the ideal approach in those kind of situations going forward. Yeah. And Umar's opinion in the Shura was actually in accordance with what Allah revealed, was what to do with the prisoners of war after Badr. Mm-hmm. That the Prophet ﷺ agreed with the consultation, the opinion, the suggestion that let's take a route of more leniency as opposed to a route of more harshness. Mm-hmm. And Umar was like, we should be more harsh. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu said, let's be more lenient. The Prophet ﷺ said, I like Abu Bakr's suggestion of being a little more lenient. They said, we'll go with leniency. Allah revealed a verse, said, next time, choose a little bit more strictness. Mm-hmm. And that's really fascinating. Yeah. But ultimately, a lot of that leniency that was shown in that moment, interestingly, that leniency was shown to people who would become Muslim later on. Oh, subhanAllah. So there's still ultimately good that came out of it. Mm. Even though Allah said for the future, be a little more tough, be a little more harder, but there was a good that came out of it. Because a lot of those people that were shown leniency became Muslim down the road.
It kind of reminds me of, there are moments where you're going to make shura, you're going to go with your initial decision, but then you'll come to realize that the shura was right. Right? So you're going to go with what you thought, and then you're going to realize, but there's still going to be good in the decision you made. Yeah. But you're going to say, okay, later, you know what? I am going to go a different route. And shura really, to some degree, like istikhara and shura, istishara, and these acts of seeking counsel from Allah, seeking counsel from people, it is really about being optimistic. Yes. Because you can't be a pessimistic, person of shura. No. You can't walk into a gathering and say, this is not going to work. So there really is talking almost about also the disposition of the person who's seeking shura. Yeah. You have to come at it with objectiveness. You have to come at it open-minded. Otherwise, it's never going to work.
No, and you're talking about like the benefits of shura. Imam al-Qurtubi, in the tafsir of this verse, he actually does talk about that one of the main benefits, outcomes, like one of the main deliverables of doing shura doesn't really even have to do with necessarily what decision you came to. Mm-hmm. He said the actual goal of it is connecting the hearts together. Oh. That regardless of what happens with the outcome, when we sat and we just did shura, we're united.
So what do you do, Ustadh Obaidullah? And we'll finish here because I know we spent a long time talking about shura. We're making shura with each other here on this topic. What do you do if you are sought for advice, you give an opinion, it ends up being that you were right,
but action was different.
But the action was different than how do you respond in that case? I mean, what's the prophetic grace in those situations?
I think it's interesting because the answer is in the question in a way. It's like, you were consulted, you're not the main player in this. Like, you're on the outside of it at the end of the day. Like, it's that person's istikhara, it's that person seeking khayr, that person seeking shura. You're kind of the object of the shura. Yeah. You're not like the subject of the story. Mm-hmm. So like, it's okay sometimes.
Main character syndrome.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And sometimes it's okay. It's not about you, or it's not an attack on you for going.
I know you do. You're impressive, Shaykh. Really, you are.
And I think the fascinating thing here is also like, at the end of the day, the reason we do shura, all the benefits we mentioned, is really because Allah commanded us to.
That's it.
Right? Like, if you can't find any other reason, if those aren't convincing and you're like, well, it hasn't worked out that way for me, or this or that. And it's like, no, that Allah commanded you to do it, so you do it. And if you can be hopeful and optimistic and enjoy the good, and even if you can't see it, you still got to do it. Yeah. Like, it's the commandment whether you like it or not. And then for the recipient or the one being sought from, the reason you respond, because the other thing, an interesting point is sometimes people are like, I'm tired of being the one consulted. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't want to be involved in everybody saying, why is everybody coming and asking me? And it's like, look, you're part of the equation. If Allah commanded the person to do shura and they're doing shura with you, you're part of that now. You're part of that commandment, and you do your best, and then, again, leave it at that.
Do we have any prophetic moments, Shaykh, where there was I told you so? Like waving the finger in somebody's face, letting them know? Or even if there was it done with grace, with class? Of course, it's the Prophet ﷺ. When there's moments where the Prophet ﷺ comes back after the fact and tells people, you should have listened to me.
Man, subhanAllah. Like, the big moment is obviously the archers leaving their post during the Battle of Uhud. But again, the verse that talks about it, that the Prophet ﷺ basically forgave them, made dua for them, like in their absence, like at night, he's like making dua for them. And then the next day, he's like bringing them back into the circle. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's probably nothing, I mean, if you think about the implications of what their decision had done, whether you look at Hamza radiallahu anhu and other companions that were martyred, there's probably, ultimately, if you look at the seerah, maybe no more painful reintegration, right, into the community more than that.
No.
And that's when it was actually commanded.
Yeah.
And in part because why? Because just like Ustadh Obaidullah said, the reality is that this is part of the community process, and you can't leave people out of it.
No.
And they made a mistake just like anybody does. And even if you were right, which he was, sallallahu alaihi wasallam,
always.
Even if you were right, the reality is that if you take the route of, finger wagging in the face of somebody and saying, I told you so, you're destroying all of what Shura came to do, which is unite people together.
I was going to say like 2 verses later, which we won't go into a lot of detail, but just it's right there, the answer that, okay, we did a Shura, and I gave my suggestion, a very impassioned kind of case and all of that. And I thought it was a really good point and this and that. And then basically you decided to do completely the opposite of that. But it was a genuine discussion. You weren't just kind of like tokenizing me or whatever. No, you listened to me. We went back and forth. We discussed it. You asked some follow-up questions. It was real. But then ultimately you felt that, okay, it was best to go in that route. And I'm sitting there kind of feeling a certain way about this now. Because again, we're not like Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu. We're not Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Inshallah, we should be. And may Allah make us like them. But sometimes we're not there yet. So I'm feeling a certain way right now. And Allah says, فَمَنْ عَفَى وَأَصَّحَ فَأَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ. Because afa, a lot of times we translate as forgiveness, but actually the word afa actually means to let it go. So the verse is saying, so if you just let it go, وَأَصْلَحَ, and then just make good. So if I just kind of like in that moment, I can just kind of get over myself. I can just let it go and I can walk up to you and I can shake your hand and be like, Jazakallah khair, man, good conversation. Thank you for asking me. فَأَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ. My rewards with Allah. I don't need any kind of worldly recognition. My rewards with Allah. But it's just those 2 things I got to do, where I got to get over myself in my own head, and I just got to walk up and I just got to shake your hand. And if I can do that, get over myself and shake your hand, everything else will fall into place.
People are looking for practical ways to find spirituality. And this is like a situation that happens almost every day.
All the time.
In which you can actually live Qur'anically in the most mundane of situations. May Allah Ta'ala give us that success, inshallah. Thanks for the conversation. I hope, inshallah, we find benefit and that everyone else does as well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.